covered up, excuses made for the bruises. The truth is concealed out of fear for setting you up. I don't know what set you off. I keep my head down, hide the tears and wear that smile. The mirror reveals that time ugly tale. Maybe you're telling the truth. I just want a way out, out. I'm hoping somebody will find out and pull me out of these chains.
I was afraid to breathe, afraid to breathe, afraid to breathe.
He broke the door behind me, he went in there, he punched the mirror and that piece of glass. He grabbed a piece of the glass and he stabbed me in the neck.
He would get upset, he would hide the keys, he would start fights, he would, like I said, I'd be sleeping and he would wake me up by strangling me. And then on one particular day, I had just had enough and I was packing my things. And as I turned to look at him, I'm holding our daughter. She was probably 5 or 6 months old. And I looked down the barrel of a double-barrel shotgun and he told me, "Bitch, if you leave me, I'll kill you."
If you can remember the late 70s and very early 80s, people didn't talk about domestic violence. Everything between a husband and wife was to be their own business behind closed doors. The prevailing attitude at that time was, what did she do to provoke him? She was the victim, always. What did she do to provoke him? If she had been nicer, had cooked a better dinner, maybe he wouldn't be beating her. Parents didn't like to take in their own daughters because it was a blight on them. They thought this was terrible that a man and a woman were fighting and they didn't want to have anything to do with it. If she didn't ask for it, it wouldn't happen.
Well, I think it is difficult under any circumstances for people to leave relationships. We are people who are made for attachment. And when you ribbon attachment with abuse, be it psychological, sexual, or physical abuse, it creates such complex dynamics really for anyone. However, when you add the financial vulnerability and the social stigma and the assumptions that people had, especially back then, about who was abused, it made it impossible for many women to see their way out.
It used to be the police would go and say to a woman, "Do you want me to prosecute him?" And she, of course, would be scared to death to say, "Oh yeah, do that," because she knew that when he got out, he'd just beat the devil out of her again. So they always put the onus on the victim, which was too bad. But as time went on, law enforcement and the lawyers started working with us, and we got more prosecutions, more help in the courts. People understood the dynamics of domestic violence, and it was a dirty little secret in many places, but it was something that was out in the open.
So it became, common. It was common. I'm sure it had been common for, who knows, we can imagine, for how long before that, in which officers would show up and basically tell people to calm down, give people a kind of a little talk, come on, sometimes even threaten, if I'm called back here, I'm going to haul both of you in. And then, of course, that would trigger a tremendous amount of fear, I think, especially for women, again, with children in the home. Oh my goodness, they'll take my children away. And so it was often that kind of situation that made it very difficult for people to risk calling the police.
I felt like we had one sort of a breakthrough success in terms of how we were able to have an effect. And that was that we established a sort of a partnership, I thought, with local law enforcement, where we would be able to call for a backup when we went to get the woman's belongings from her home. Typically she would come to the shelter and with nothing but the clothes on her back, maybe a few items in a garbage bag with her children in tow. And so we would look for a time when the husband was not to be at home, and that's when we would call for deputy sheriff, police officer to meet us at the residence, and then we would be able to go into the home and get the belongings that would tide her over. And what seemed like such a hopeful situation, this feeling of support from law enforcement back in that time didn't so much turn out to be that way. Again, this was the time when people would snicker about the topic of domestic violence, or they would think that it's absolutely no one's business but the business of the couple.
We were really learning as we went, and those were inspiring times, but times in which there were limited services of what we could offer. But at that point, it was very difficult to get help from agencies who they themselves weren't quite knew what to do, and they weren't oriented toward that. And in fact, because of the shame that women often felt, be it as a battered woman or from sexual abuse, it was very hard for people to speak openly about it.
I was called to the hospital because they had a victim in the hospital who, when I tell you, was black and blue from her head to her toes, she was black and blue from her head to her toes. I had never seen anything like it. I just couldn't believe it. And I talked with her, and as I talked with her, she said, you know, he really didn't mean to do this. And I just want to get out here and make it up to him. I'm so sorry. And I was so flabbergasted to hear firsthand from a woman who was so severely beaten that she had been taught that this was her fault and she didn't want to do anything about it. It was very sad. And of course, I couldn't make her do anything about it. I wanted her to, but she didn't.
And I know that one of the most determining experiences that I had was receiving a call from a young woman who was terrified, and I had gone to pick her up and take her to one of our safe homes before we had a shelter, and she was quite beaten up and bloody and clearly very traumatized. And yet her husband found out where she was. I think she'd called at one point and he had apologized, and this of course began the cycle of women going back. I'll never do it again. I'm really sorry. You know me, baby. I love you so much. We'll work this out. And so of course she went home. Then she called again, and this continued to happen 3 or 4 times until one day I remember when I got a call, and with a very different tone in her voice, she said, "Don't you ever contact me again. I will never leave my husband. I'm in love with my husband. I'm never going to leave. He is my world." And I was just disoriented, you know, what is going on? One, I had never called this person. She, of course, had called and sought assistance from Spark repeatedly. But later, she gave me a powerful education, and that is that she contacted me and said, anytime that I call and speak like that, I want you to know it's because I am being threatened. During that call, he had a gun to my head, and he told me what I had to say to you. Please know I didn't mean any of it. I don't know how to get out of this. That individual ended up killing this woman and killing their child.
He used to drink a lot, and he drove when he drank, and we would go places, and he'd be in his truck and he'd take me out to this cornfield, and he would drive really fast and do all these, spin outs and whatever, like within inches of trees on my side, and say, all I'd have to do is go a little farther and I could kill you.
I was 25 years old. He began to stalk me after we broke up and told him that it was over. And he would show up to my house and knock on my windows, knock on my doors. He would constantly call me, text me hundreds of times a day. He would show up at my church, show up at my child's daycare, show up at my work. He wouldn't stop. When he showed up at the church, he brought with him a weapon. It was a gun, and I looked behind me and seen that he was there. He held me down on the bench and would not let me up.
So domestic violence is about power and control. One person exerting power and control over another. It really isn't about losing your temper. The power and control issues, maybe that this person is using monetary circumstances, that you don't have the ability to have any money with which you can get out of that circumstance. Maybe you have small children. Maybe you don't have a vehicle that you can drive. Maybe you don't have any friends or family that live in the area. For example, there was a case that I had with a woman that lived way out east, and the perpetrator was a doctor. So when you think about the socioeconomic circumstances, it crosses all boundaries. Law enforcement needs to recognize that when they get out there and look at the big picture and understand how we might be able to go about helping this individual get out of those circumstances, offering them hope services, offering them another place to go and stay, and certainly with our report writing, keeping that information confidential so that they can be safe during that time period. Back in the 70s and early 80s, the statutes that were in place that allowed us to deal with the domestic circumstance focused primarily on spouse battery. So in essence, the laws were legislating morality. They wanted us to be dealing with people that were married. And although people that were in intimate relationships that were living together were just as likely to kill each other or batter each other, we were not allowed to treat them the same under the law at that time. So we were curtailed from making a lot of arrests, and we would counsel with people. We would try to encourage people to leave or not leave, and we weren't really reducing fatalities, domestic related fatalities, because we just didn't have the tools and we didn't have the training and understanding of the dynamics around domestic violence. And I am happy to tell you that if we come forward to today, the laws have changed. Number one, let's talk about the statute has been rewritten with an emphasis on people living together as if a family unit, which has just opened the doors for us to deal with same-sex relationships, intimate partner relationships, regardless of whether people are married or not, which is again treating everyone equally across the board. Training in the past for law enforcement might not have been very specific as to what the issues were. Maybe they would have information that they would put out regarding a change in the statute or what have you. But they really weren't dealing with the problems that officers were having on the road. So if we fast forward to today, and I do training specifically on domestic violence here for the Manatee County Sheriff's Office, and we focus on some very important key issues like determining primary aggressor. You would think that that would be an easy thing to do, but it isn't. Having been out there on the road and understanding that sometimes both parties will have injuries and sometimes both parties will be impaired. Your victim may not always be the perfect victim. That it's really important to understand how you would determine who is the primary aggressor. As a matter of fact, the statute literally tells us that we have to do that. We must determine primary aggressor. And we should not be arresting both parties with respect to domestic violence incidences when we cannot determine primary aggressor. They really do not want us to arrest both parties. So we focus on this training for law enforcement so that they have a better understanding of probable cause, recognizing primary aggressor, and arresting the appropriate person, because if they arrest the wrong person, you can have long-term consequences. That person may never want to speak with law enforcement, may never feel comfortable telling them what has happened, may not reach out, may not even call 911. So there's just a lot of issues that can take place. So we focus that training in that area. Same thing with children being present. When we go into the past and we look at how we dealt with children in the past, there were many times they were completely ignored. They weren't talked to, you might have arrested their parent, maybe even both parents in the past, since that wasn't discouraged at that time. And how traumatic would that be for that child who has been living in this war zone type environment to see both parents taken away by law enforcement? And maybe now they feel that law enforcement is the bad guy and is somebody that they're going to dislike and hate forever. So we make sure that we talk to these children because they can be a wealth of information. When we do arrest an individual, they don't get out of jail right away. And so that minimizes some of the power and control that they might have otherwise because they can't get to the victim immediately. They're going to go before a judge the next day, which may not be until 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And so there's a little bit of time that that victim has to step back, take a breath, get some assistance, go to the courthouse, get an injunction in place, and certainly when that person may bond out or is released the next day, they're issued a no contact order. So there's a lot more tools in our chest today than we had in the past, as long as law enforcement is using all of those tools and taking advantage of that. Sometimes when victims do not report and law enforcement doesn't intercede, what we see is an escalation in this violence because there's nothing to stop them. There's no consequence for their action, no immediate consequence for their action. So law enforcement has realized that it's so important to have a pro-arrest policy, to give that victim some time, to give that victim an opportunity to interact with services that will help them and help them get out of that circumstance.
See, the hard part is with him, I never left any marks, any bruises, anything like that. It would be things like I'd be sleeping and he would wake me up by strangling me.
One day he was beating me. He was mad over something I had cooked, and I fell to the ground. When I tried to get up, I was on my hands and my knees, and he came and he jumped on my back. So it broke something in my back, and I couldn't move. And I stayed on that ground for like 6 hours in my apartment with my son in the crib crying, and I couldn't move. I couldn't walk, I couldn't move. The phone was all the way in the living room. I couldn't even crawl. And I remember that day because my son was crying and crying. I knew he was hungry. I knew he had to be changed, and I couldn't get to him. I had to wait till somebody came and knocked on my door.
I've been with the Sheriff's Office for 27 years. I've been working in domestic violence, though, for about 18 years. I ended up primarily handling most of the domestic violence or sexual assaults call, and I really started trying to figure out how I could be more help to these people. I remember in 1995, it was Easter Sunday, and I had responded to a domestic violence call, and when I got there, the woman on the scene had a big fat lip. It was cut. She was bloody and she was yelling. She was very upset. I was trying to calm her down. I walked inside the residence and some of the furniture was gone. And the children, there were small children, 3 of them, were sitting on the floor in the living room eating a box of sugar pops. And that may not mean much to other people, but in my mind I'm thinking it's Easter Sunday, the mother is beat up and the children are eating cereal, and I'm thinking of my own family having a wonderful ham dinner at home. So as I was trying to help this woman and take this report, the little girl came over to me and she gave me a shell, and it was the brightest pink I had ever seen, but it was broken. And it was so symbolic at that moment that when I got back in my patrol car, I held the shell in my hand, which I still have today, and that shell this Easter, this year, will be 20 years old, just made me cry. I remember questioning myself several times. Are you really the person for this? Do you have the heart? Do you have the soul to continue to do this? Because you have to have a certain persona to be working with people that are victims. You know, it's not a victim of a theft or of a burglary or a robbery. These are victims of emotional, violent crimes. These people are being beaten by the ones they love. And there is a completely different criminal aspect when it comes to dealing with abusers. People who want to abuse and control the people they love. And unfortunately, the victims love their abusers. We, the public, can stand by and look at them on the outside of the box and say, why is she staying? Why is this happening? You know, and you got to remember, we're looking at them through eyes. Victims look at their abusers with their hearts. Their first and primary goal is trying to please the abuser. They think, okay, I did this time. Let me change. Let me try to show him that I can do better, and this will not happen again. These victims are constantly trying to fix themselves. They're trying to fix the abuser, and they don't realize that the abuser can't be fixed, not by the victim. I look for things that are out of place. I look to see what level of violence is really in this home. You're looking for broken toys. You're looking for injured animals. There's a direct correlation between animal abuse, child abuse, and domestic violence. There's a whole continuum, a cycle of violence in that home. These are the flags that young officers or even veteran officers need to be cognizant of when they go into these homes. A case that stands in my mind and will probably always be there is I remember this woman, while I was interviewing her, she would tell me that she had prompts that she would give her kids when she knew she was going to be abused by her husband that evening. And she told me her son was 12, the daughter was 10. When her and her husband would become involved in an argument, and she knew where it was going to lead, because this is years of abuse. So the victim gets to learn the stages. She knows what's going to happen next. She's learned how to protect herself and her family. She would give her son a look, and he knew that look meant to take his sister, go into his bedroom, lock the door. Once they locked the door, he and his sister would crawl out the bedroom window. They would find a hidden car key that the mother kept hidden for them, and he and his sister would stay in that car until the mom came and got them, because the environment was made safe again for them. And there was times that they would stay all night in that car. One of the things that I talk to victims about is how this was their first step into becoming empowered. Making that call was the first step into getting their lives back, to get back into control of who they are. Most women lose themselves when they're in this type of situation. They forget who they are. They're so focused on trying to keep the family together and trying to stop the violence, trying to stop the physical, the emotional, the financial. It's not always physical with domestic violence, it's emotional. I mean, you can be verbally abused to the point where you hurt more than just taking a punch to the face. I had a very dear friend of mine ask me just recently, well, it's not my business. I mean, when does it become my business? Anything that is a detriment to you, anything that you see that can affect you or can affect your neighbors or affect your family, affect the community that you live in, it is your business. You need to report that. We have many, many, many victims in this world, and they need to become survivors. And it's only the strong that will support the weak, and we can't allow these things to go on in our community. If I was to really give advice to victims, I would tell them, Do not look at yourself as a victim. I want you to look at yourself as a survivor. I want you to remember who you are. I want you to get that control back in your life. Do you want to live the rest of your life being beaten? Do you want to live the rest of your life being miserable? Do you want that smile back on your face? Then become a survivor and get out.
The last time he strangled me and I lost consciousness when my daughter was 2 weeks old. And I saw my life flash before me. I have a child, and I thought, if this continues, I will never see that child grow up.
It was several incidents. There was a time that I was in the bed sleeping. Sleeping hard because I had just started my master's program. And I had been up all night, and I had just went to bed, maybe been to bed about an hour. I think I went to bed about 4:30. He gets up early because he has to go to work early. And he flipped me out of the bed. He took the whole mattress and flipped me completely out of the bed. And I remember trying to pick myself off the floor, and I looked at him and I said, why are you doing this to me? And he said, you know what, your ass up, and I need money. So he took my purse. My mom had just bought me a little wallet as a gift because my mom lived in Georgia. She wasn't here. And I said, please don't take my purse. This is my car, no money. I don't have anything else. And he chased me to the kitchen, and I was holding on to my purse with dear life, and he took my hand and he pushed it to the tile floor, and he mashed it so hard that I had an impression on the left side of my head. And he continued until I released the purse.
The cases that have struck my heart have been domestic violence cases. My passion for these cases came about kind of organically. I was a young prosecutor. I didn't have a lot of life experience, and I started to handle these cases, and very quickly I learned the challenges and the emotions and the special, unique circumstances that these cases face prosecutors. So I'd be sitting at my desk and I'd have maybe a theft charge cross my desk, and then maybe a trespass. And what I quickly found was that 10 domestic violence cases would come in. It becomes really quick that you become a specialist in these cases. Some women would say to me, yes, that's what happened. He punched me in the face. He dragged me across the room. He strangled me. But I can't testify. Why can't you do this without me? Why is my statement not enough? What can you do to hold him accountable without me? So we'd look for a workaround. We'd find ways the law would let us get these cases into the courtroom to bring justice for our victims in a safe and effective way. Prosecuting domestic violence cases can be challenging because of what they are. Here you've got two people that are in a relationship. There are emotions tied to that. It's not like someone who goes in and steals from a big box store. These have such wide-ranging implications. You may have the victim who's tied to the defendant, the abuser, because of financial reasons, because of children, because of these lives that they have that are intertwined. And they have a hard time of extracting themselves and cooperating and testifying because of those strong emotional holds that we as people have with one another. 25 years ago, our court system and our laws did not give prosecutors the extent of protection that it now gives victims of domestic violence. Now, we are able to utilize new laws, new and different and innovative ways of putting cases together so that those cases can now grace our courtroom steps. We will prosecute domestic violence cases even if the victim doesn't testify, because it transfers the power away from the hands of the abuser and into the hands of the law and our justice system. Now, the courtroom and the justice system can become a passageway for a safe way out for our victims of domestic violence, and will hold our abusers accountable.
He would tell me that I'm ugly, I'm fat, and basically nobody else would like me or love me other than him. And probably it wasn't until about 3 years into the marriage that the physical abuse started. I came home after a night shift and I took too long to get home. So he kicked me with a steel-toed boot.
You know, and so I really thought I had come to the conclusion that my mom or someone would raise my daughter, and I was gonna either do something or he was gonna kill me. Because that's what he said to me all the time, and I believed it. I believed he truly would kill me.
Domestic violence crimes are unique to prosecute. They're unique in the sense that the victim and the defendant have an intimate relationship. The relationship was premised, at least at the beginning, on love. That relationship turned violent, which often brings the relationship into the legal system. Some of the tools that we can use in the legal system for prosecuting domestic violence cases, especially when a victim is reluctant to testify or is afraid to testify against her abuser, is we can and will prosecute those cases without the assistance of the victim. The decision to prosecute and to bring charges against an abuser is up to the state attorney's office. Other tools that we have available to us through the legal system are injunctions and pretrial release conditions once a defendant has been arrested for domestic violence. An injunction is a court order issued by a judge prohibiting that the abuser have any contact directly or indirectly with the victim. A violation of that court order results in further proceedings against the abuser. One of the most rewarding aspects of working with victims of domestic violence is to witness the transformation from victim into empowered individual. They have endured a horrendous crime. They have faced their abuser. They have assisted us in seeking justice. It is an inspiration to see someone take a tragedy and do something positive with it. By breaking their silence and telling their story, they impact the community in a positive way, and this benefits all of us.
Shortly after I moved to Sarasota, my son and I moved into the apartment. I was working, I was a waitress. I had done that most of my life, been a waitress. And so Adam and I, my baby and I, had moved into this little house, and the man that was renting out the back half of the apartment was actually my future ex-husband. That's how I met him. I think we were together maybe a few months and I became pregnant. And one of the things that has always bothered me about that is, as abusive as my husband had become throughout the marriage, when he found out that I was pregnant, he wasn't even surprised or angry. And for somebody who couldn't have children, I always thought that that was maybe another way to manipulate me. There was one time when I had told my husband that I knew how to make an apple pie. He wanted me to make him a pie, and I actually had never made one. And so I was going to surprise him. I ran to the store and I was going to surprise him and bring home this pie. And I really thought that he was going to be happy that I thought of him and I brought this pie home. And when I got there, the door was locked, and I didn't really understand that because we never locked that door. And so as I got to the door and I'm knocking on the door, it was a glass door, I saw him coming through the kitchen. And as he got closer to the door, I saw him make a fist and punch the glass as my face was up against it. And he ended up cutting my cornea in 5 different places. It took about 2 or 3 days before I was allowed to even go to the doctor. I think throughout the marriage, that was the only time I ever did seek medical attention for any injuries. I remember another incident where he and I were at the house and I had just finished cleaning up the kitchen. We had had dinner and he was sitting in the living room, and I went into the living room and I sat down next to him, and as soon as I sat down, he said, "Get me a dish of ice cream." And I kind of made a comment. I didn't really say anything. I just kind of went, ugh, because I was frustrated that I was just in the kitchen. Why wouldn't you ask me while I was in there? And because I made that sound, he said, "Forget it, I'll get my own ice cream." And he jumped up, and I'm jumping up behind him, trying to hurry up and help him because I knew that he was going to be angry. And so I ran into the kitchen after him, and he got himself the ice cream. And I went and sat back down on the couch, and he came and sat down next to me, and he took the ice cream and slammed it into my face. And that's how I have this scar here, was from the dish of ice cream. I remember one time when I was about 8 months pregnant, I had come out of the bathroom, I had a bathrobe on, and he wanted to have sex, and I said no. He had been calling me terrible names throughout the day, and I thought, you know, I'm not going to do that. And so he ripped my bathrobe off me, and he kicked me outside and locked me outside. And I remember I went and sat in my car naked, and I was sitting there thinking, you know, if I had keys, I'd just drive away. I don't even care that I'm naked. And then soon after that, I heard Adam crying. He picked up Adam and he brought him outside, and he threw him in the back seat of the car. And Adam and I sat in the car for a while, and then I remember him coming out, and he was knocking on the car window, and I didn't want to roll down the window, and he was acting very nice, and he was like, "Kim, just roll down the window." And I rolled it down, and he's like, "What are you doing out here? Why don't you come in?" And I'm looking at him thinking, I'm out here because of you. I'm out here with my baby because of you. I think the one thing that changed was he started beating up my son. And so one morning I remember laying in bed getting ready to get up to help him get organized for work, and he told me that I could just stay in bed, that I could sleep in, that he would eat with the guys. And I remember laying there thinking, oh, I'm so tired. And I was so happy that he didn't make me get up. And then I heard Adam crying in the next room, and I heard him screaming. And I remember laying in bed thinking, you know, it's just another day living this way. And I eventually fell back to sleep. And when I woke up again, Adam was standing by my bed, and he had black eyes and blood coming from his nose. And he said, "My daddy's mad at me." And that was when I knew that, as afraid as I was to leave him, I needed to tell. I remember that night I had to go to work for 5 o'clock, and I was walking in the lobby of the hotel that I worked at, and Dina was coming out of the dining room, and I remember she said, "Hey, how you doing?" And usually I was one of those people, and I'd say, "Great, let's go make money." And I remember standing in the hotel lobby and just crying and telling her how terrible I was. And she said, "Kim, come on, let's go talk." And I went and sat in the Holiday Inn bathroom with her for my entire shift. I think we sat there from 5 until almost 10 o'clock at night. And I started telling her all the different things that had happened throughout this relationship. The boys and I went and stayed in a local shelter for abused women and children. And one of the things that the shelter had told me was that I had to quit my job when I first went in there with the boys, because he could follow me from my job, and you know, potentially I and anybody else living in the shelter would be in danger. And so I understood that, but I also found myself with no money and 2 children. I was able to go back to the hotel, and they had saved my position for me, so I was able to go back to work, which many times jobs don't want to be involved, or they don't want people that potentially could bring danger to them there. But the hotel was great. And my girlfriend Dina from work, she had agreed to become my roommate. She knew that, you know, financially he wasn't helping with the children, and so she said that she would move in with me and help me. The shelter was right. He had followed me home from work after I had gone back to work, and he found out where Dina and I had moved to. And then I would see him all the time. He was on the street. There was a church that sat just opposite my front door, and I would see him sitting there. I would call the police. As much as when I was in the marital home, I never called the police. I never told. And when he started stalking me is when I started calling the police. And they were always very nice. They would come out, but they told me there was nothing they could do. Even though I did have the protection order, it read that he wasn't allowed to come in the dwelling. And so they would tell me, if he ever gets in your house, call me. One of the things that the judge had ordered through the protection, the restraining order, was that we were to exchange the baby at the sheriff's office for my safety. And I did that for a long time. I would load up the children and drive over to the sheriff's office, and he would follow me there because he would usually be sitting at the church parking lot watching everything I did. And I would drive over there, I would give him Joseph, and then I would head back over to the duplex, and he would follow me back with the baby. And usually visitation with the baby was him and the baby sitting in the church parking lot watching me. It was January 14th, 1989, and it was a Saturday, probably about 11 o'clock in the morning, and I was getting ready to load up the children to drive over to the sheriff's office, and I saw him sitting across the street in the parking lot. And I was on the phone with my sister, and I remember telling her, Karen, I'm not going to drive there today. I'm not going to do this anymore. And she said, well, keep me on the phone. And I said, no, I'll call you after he leaves. And so I went to the front door, and he was right across the street, and I yelled to him, and I said, just come and pick up the baby. I'm not driving to the sheriff's office, you're right here. Just come and pick up the baby. And I saw him walking across the street, and I let him in the house. And I went and sat on the couch, and Adam and Joseph, they were 1 and 3, they were right there playing by the coffee table. And when I went and sat on the couch, I kind of put my back to the armrest of the couch, and I put my feet up on the couch. And I remember him coming around and sitting right down next to me, almost sitting on my feet. And I saw him kind of lean over me, and he put his arm up against my throat and kind of leaned me even further back on the couch. And I didn't feel the first time that he stabbed me, but I saw his arm jolt, and I kind of looked to see why his arm would be doing that. And that's when I realized he had brought a knife with him, and it was one of those like Italian bread knives with the serrated edge. I didn't feel the first stab, I felt the next 11. He ended up stabbing me 12 times. And he went to slice my face, and I blocked it with this hand, and he sliced all of these fingers. This one was sliced completely off, and all these were cut. And I think just out of reaction, I went to grab the knife, and instead I grabbed the blade of the knife, and I cut my hand here, trying to get the knife away from him. I remember Adam running down the hall and opening up Dina's bedroom door and telling her to come and help me, that his daddy was hurting his mommy. And I saw her in the doorway. She was zipping up her bathrobe, and I remember yelling to her that he had a knife, and I remember her yelling that he was going to kill me, that he needed to stop. And as I'm yelling to her and she's yelling to him, he jumped off of me and kind of flew down the hallway, and I saw him stabbing her here. The first thing I thought of was get outside. That was just something I always did. When he would hurt me, I would run outside, because he never hurt me outside. The neighbors never saw it. Nobody saw it. And so I remember the way I was laying on the couch, I thought, get out. And the door that I saw was the back door, and so I got up and I ran through the kitchen and I went out the back door. And I remember thinking, if I stay back here, nobody will find me. And so I ran around the side of the duplex, and I eventually collapsed in the yard. And I remember laying there and thinking, you know, it was just really peaceful. And I remember thinking I could just go to sleep. The EMS was there and the police were there and everybody was talking to me. And I don't think I was saying anything. I think I just laid there. And then there was an officer that came up to me and he said, when you die, if you don't tell us what happened, when you die, he's gonna get away with this. And that's when I told him it was my husband, and that Dina was in the house, and that I left her in that house. And then I really don't remember much after that. I remember getting to the hospital, and then I didn't remember anything until the next day. My sister came in my room, and I had tubes going up my nose and down my throat because both my lungs had collapsed. And I remember her standing at the foot of my bed, and I asked her about Dina, and she told me that Dina had died. He had stabbed her 13 times, and that she died that day. The doctors had told me that I died twice, that there was no reason why I was alive. And I remember thinking there was, because I needed to tell this story, that people needed to realize that there are women every day living the way that I was living. And yet I had no idea. The whole time I was with him, I thought I was the only one. I thought this was just me. And that's why I thought when he would blame me for it, that there was something I could do to change it. Nobody was talking about this back in 1989, or at least I wasn't hearing about it. It was February 1990 when the trial began. It didn't take the jury very long, and they came back with a guilty verdict for killing Dina. He was given life for killing her, but in 1990, life gave him eligibility for parole after 25 years. He gave him an additional 30 years on top of the life sentence for stabbing me 12 times. He said that he had left me there to die, and so he was able to give him the maximum sentence for the attempted first-degree murder. And so it was 2 years ago, maybe a little more than 2 years ago, that I received my first victim's letter from the Parole Commission in Tallahassee, and telling me that he was eligible to come up for the parole on the murder sentence. If there was one thing that I could say to women, that are living with somebody that they're afraid of, that claims to love them, would be tell somebody.
I did have a friend in February 3rd of 2015, that was completely murdered by her abuser, and she never told anyone. And she was murdered with her baby girl. And I promised myself, not only will I not accept it, but I don't want her death to be in vain. Through hope, through, I call it angels that were unaware to me, that came out of the woodworks that helped me, is why I'm able to stand here today as a survivor.
There is help out there. Seek the help and seek it early. Find a safe way to leave. Come in and talk to somebody, because they're not alone. If I knew that I wasn't alone, and if there was somebody that I felt comfortable with that could have helped me, maybe things would have been a little bit different.
I would say get help, talk to someone. You know, don't keep it a secret, because that's what I did. I felt when you keep it, you isolate yourself. You have to talk to someone. You have to reach out to someone you trust and get some help.
There is a way out, and there is help out there, and they're not alone. I know when I was going through mine, that was the issue, was I felt alone. I felt there wasn't no help. Where was I going to go? Who was I going to turn to? Who was I going to talk to? So I would let them know that there is somewhere to go, and there are people to talk to, and there is help out there.
When somebody comes through the door at Hope Family Services for the first time, they're not always sure why they're here. They know they need help. They know they're in danger. We have people who are truly in crisis. You can tell. They're nervous, they're upset, maybe they've been up all night, law enforcement's been at their house, they're scared, they just don't know what to do. And conversely, we have people who come through the door and they're very, very calm because they're maybe in shock or don't know what to expect. And so our job is to meet them where they are and to help guide them, at least start the process. What brought you in? How can we help? We're in this together. You're the expert on your partner. We're the experts on domestic violence. So let's put our heads together and let's craft a safety plan that we know will make you feel better while keeping you alive. We know that when women come to us for help, it's not just about them. It's also about their children. Because kids who grow up witnessing domestic violence often grow up to be in domestic violence families themselves. So we have a children's program at Hope, and what we try to do is sort of a two-pronged approach. We want to help the children through the immediate crisis that they're experiencing in their family, and that's the most immediate need. But then also we work with them longer term to help break that intergenerational cycle of violence. Domestic violence is an epidemic, both nationally and here in Florida and Manatee County. You have only to open a newspaper or turn on the news and you'll read about a tragedy involving violence against women. It's everywhere. When I started in this business almost 30 years ago, I really thought that we would have ended domestic violence by now, at least here. We had great organizations doing great work, right? What more was there? We were going to teach children to be nonviolent, and we were going to have a new day. Fast forward the clock, and here we are. But I can tell you what has changed. What's changed is law enforcement's response to domestic violence. What's changed is the judiciary's response, and the state attorney's office takes it very seriously. They have a unit that focuses on these cases. It's not simply looked at as a private matter between two parties. The courts recognize that there's an impact on children. They recognize that these kids are suffering too, and they have developed a new system where families involved in the dependency court are getting relief when there's domestic violence. That is an entirely new way of looking at domestic violence in our community. When people come here, they don't know how to keep themselves safe. They just believe it'll end. They believe somebody's promises to change. I promise I'll never do it again. You know I love you and I'm sorry. Some people come in and they've been praying that God will stop the violence. Sometimes they expect law enforcement to stop the violence. There's a whole list of things. And what we teach them how to do is to take responsibility for their lives and keep themselves safe. Because at the end of the day, that's the only way they're going to survive, is if they have some strategies, tools on their tool belt, if you will, ways for them to keep their children too, and themselves safe. But the backbone of what we've done since 1980 is to provide shelter in a safe location. The building is equipped with alarms and cameras and all kinds of things so that people can sleep at night and rest and figure out what's their next course of action, what's in their best interest. And so safety planning from a safe place of our shelter, we think is key in keeping people alive. Domestic violence is never the victim's fault. And if you're suffering at the hands of someone in your family who's hurting you, please get help. Tell somebody, make a call. Services like HOPE are free and confidential, and they exist everywhere in Florida. There's 42 centers like us here, and we are here to help. It shouldn't be tolerated. If you're a neighbor and you know that next door there's domestic violence going on, call the police, make a report. If we all stand together and we all say no more, it really will end. We will make this community a safer place for women and children to live.
I could have let the day I almost died define the rest of my life. But I chose not to let that happen. I chose not to be defeated. I chose to live. I chose to find a way out. And to find a way out, you have to find a way to begin to get away from the harm, a way to begin to live again. And the first thing you do is take a deep breath, and then you let it out. You let it go, and don't be afraid to breathe. I felt almost called to do this work. In the beginning, when I would go out and talk about what had happened, I remember the mission. I was so idealistic many years ago. I just thought it would end domestic violence if we would just bring people aware of the problem. And then after probably 10 years of doing that volunteer work, now to come here and work for an organization, and I see all the different levels of assistance that we're able to provide people. But again, I think the greatest thing that we can do for somebody who's living in a home that they're afraid of is provide that support and safety. When somebody comes here, my standard question is, what brought you here today? Because usually, even though they might walk through this door today, there's been a lot of other stuff going on long before they ever are here. And so whatever that answer is, then we start making decisions and look at options to figure out how to best help her and her children. We talk about power and control. We talk about what part of what's happening can you do something about, because maybe there is something you can do differently. However, the majority of people that are living with somebody who is harming them, they have no control over what's happening. And so usually I'm having a conversation about that. 25 years ago, I was that scared person living in a home that I didn't know if I'd get out. And 25 years later, I have an opportunity to help people, like you said, hundreds. I know I've spoken to at least thousands over the years, but have the opportunity to help them to live a better life. I've heard different gals come up to me and say, I heard you speak 2 years ago at a training, or you went and spoke in my high school. And I remember when I first started working here, I used to have an office by the front door, and there was a young lady that came through, and I didn't recognize her, and she said, Kim, and I said, hi, and she said, I heard you a couple years ago. She said, it took me 2 years, but I've left him. And I said, oh, I'm so glad that you made it here. Now I see the changes that we've made over the last 25 years of being involved, which many of them are great changes. We need more. We need more awareness. But again, I really believe it starts with the children, educating our children to realize they can get whatever they want in life. That American dream is possible, but you don't have to do it through fear and intimidation. If you're a woman that's living in a home where you're afraid of somebody who claims to love you, you're afraid for yourself or your children, one of the greatest things that I would like to tell you is tell somebody, whether it's Hope Family Services or a girlfriend or your parents, but tell somebody. Because many times domestic violence increases because it's a secret. There are many different reasons that I've continued to be involved in helping victims of domestic violence, but if I had to give somebody a simple answer, my answer would be that just because I got out after 3 years of somebody hurting me, I saw, as I got more and more involved in this movement, I saw what an epidemic this was. And so, besides I wanted to be there for my children and teach them that this was absolutely unacceptable behavior, I wanted to reach out and be able to help other people that were still in a situation that they weren't safe. And so again, it's hard to give one answer as to what inspired me. I feel as if it's my purpose.
To the victims of domestic violence, I want to tell you that law enforcement is here for you. We're here to protect, we're here to serve, and we're here to uphold the statutes of the state of Florida, and we're going to be there for you. If you will call, or other persons will call and let us know, we're going to come and we're going to take care of that situation. And if you're a perpetrator of domestic violence, then we'll be coming, and if we have probable cause, we'll be putting you in jail because we have a pro-arrest policy.
So I think the important thing is that we join together as a community to continue to help people rework both the roots of violence, strengthen the existing support systems, and also develop a vision of what's possible on the other side.
As a detective, as a law enforcement officer, as a woman, as a mother, we can no longer tolerate domestic violence or sexual assault. We are strong and we have to believe in ourselves. We can put an end to this. We need to educate our children. We need to educate ourselves, reacquaint ourselves with who we really are. We can do this.
If there's one thing that I want people to remember, is that we cannot tolerate domestic violence. It's time to stop. We need to call the police when we know someone's being battered. We need to reach out and get help if it's us being battered. We need to stand together and stop it once and for all. Together, there really is hope for the future.
Broken, bruised, and defeated, she falls to her knees. He wouldn't have done this if I'd done as he pleased. Recalling the way he smiled when they first met, convinced giving him her heart was still the safest bet. The light's fading from your eyes. Take control, don't give in to the lies. You can breathe alone. Your life is not his, so hold on to hope. I promise this world has love to make you whole. Time and time again she tried, but never was enough. Keeping a dark pain inside, how did things get so rough? Months and years of tainted words burned into her mind. This is as close to happiness that she believed she'd find. If the light's fading from your eyes, take control, don't give in to the lies. You can breathe alone. Your life is not his, but your own. So hold on to hope. Promise this world has love to make you whole. But I want to feel, and I want to see. I'm ready to break these shackles off. I'm ready to be free. So I can breathe alone. Not his, but my own. So I'll hold on to hope, so I can see the love this world has to show.